Hello guys, Eric the Goblin here, and I thought I'd follow up on a comment that one of my users made regarding when to roll and test abilities and saving throws and all that other kinds of stuff. And I guess it had never occurred to me that without clear guidelines on when to use these things, people who are new to this hobby may not know when or how or why we test certain things, you know? So I thought I would make this video to try and explain some things. So I've taken the liberty of filling out most of a character sheet here. It's not really the whole thing, but here's Aaron, here's our human fighter. You can see that he's got some ability scores and he's got his saves, which is all we're going to use for this video. And we're going to explain at least how I approach testing characters and resolving tasks outside of combat, which I think was what was the question that was asked. So in most cases, you'll see that our ability scores here have modifiers next to them because we're playing the basic fantasy role-playing system rather. And we following the chart here, which gives us the modifiers for our abilities. But what actually do we do with that, or when do we test that? We know that having a strength of +1 means that we're more likely to hit and do damage in combat. But what about busting open a door or something like that? Well, you have to have some sort of test for that, How do you know? And since the book gives you a very basic system to use for that, I believe it's in, the ability rolls here, So a level 1 character succeeds on a roll of 17 or higher when testing an ability. But that is really an unfair and kind of unrealistic way to challenge the characters, A roll of 17 is already quite high, So if you're using that as your baseline for testing a character's abilities, more often than not, they're going to fail against very, basic tasks that, since you don't have any other guidelines to go by, may not make sense. So why don't we look at alternate ways to handle this using the same system that we have here? Well, one thing you can do is to take a note and page from 5th edition, which has target numbers, right? Difficulty ratings, DC's difficulty challenge. I don't know if that's copyright. I can't say that, but target numbers, right? What the thing you got to roll to do the thing, right? So if we're looking at the book, we'll see that a level 1 character succeeds on a roll of 17, which, as I said before, that doesn't really happen that often, right? It's not really happening that often. But it does give us a bunch of numbers here, right? A bunch of numbers to play with. So if we look at that, it starts at 17 and ends at 7. Now that's kind of awkward for me. Why don't we just say 5 to 15, right? What if a menial task is 5, which means you probably don't even want to roll for this. It's like, there's no point to having a difficulty that low. You're basically saying, please don't critically fail at that point. A 10. Well, that's about average, right? That's about an average roll if you're looking at it from an ability point standpoint. And 15 seems a little more challenging, but not outside the realm of possible. So why don't we just look at that? These two numbers here, 10 and 15. And maybe even, understand that 20 is a success anyway. But you can add that in as impossible. So now you have your 5 different target numbers that are all based around the number that you're rolling on the 20-sided die, right? You have a scale of difficulty: trivial, average, challenging, impossible, or whatever terms you want to use, right? From easiest to most challenging, most difficult. Now you have an idea of what kinds of numbers the players need to generate in order to succeed at different things. Let's say that Aaron was trying to persuade the barkeeper into giving up information that he's trying to keep to himself, right? We look at our character, we see that they have a charisma of 18, which means a +3. And the dungeon master, in this case, has said that he needs a 10 in order to succeed. So roll the die. 4 + 3 is 7. It's not enough. As charming as Aaron is, the barkeeper is tight-lipped, right? What about, let's say Aaron's trying to decipher a little limerick that's written Elvish. And he can read Elvish, but he can't read or make sense of the rhyming. So we'll say that even though it would be a trivial task to someone who knew it, because it's written in a weird way, we're going to move that challenge back to average. And we're going to use Aaron's intelligence to figure out if he can read this rhyme. See, and about an average, we subtract the score of -1, we get a 17. So you as the dungeon master have a control over how likely the characters are to succeed. That's one method. And this is okay, you know, this will serve you in a lot of different instances. Now, what about these saving throws? When do we use these? Right? It's not always something the characters are trying to achieve when you roll. Sometimes you want to resist something, and that's what these saving throws are. And they don't really make a lot of sense until you notice something about them. They come in a gradient of numbers. If you look at them from lowest to highest, you'll see that you have another sliding scale. Something that is relatively easy to resist, you could use the death save, D, death of 12, in this case, because we're a fighter. And something that's really much more difficult could have say you'd have to roll against the spell saving throw spells. Clearly, there's going to be instances in the book where certain things require specific saves, but there'll be times when you're playing when you won't have those guidelines. You'll have to make judgment calls. Let's say that Aaron is running down a flight of stairs, and we're going to roll to see if he accidentally trips on a tripwire and, you know, tumbles down. I think that since he's running down the stairs, this would be kind of difficult. So I'm going to pick 14, Petrify. You know, we're not going to worry about what the spell save actually is. We're going to look at it in terms of difficulties again. Right? What is that? A 1? No, Aaron flies down the stairs and cracks his skull open, right? Right? You know, you're still going to get the swinginess of the D20, but having guidelines as to what these abilities can be used for, what these saves can be used for, and knowing how difficult the tasks or the dangers are to the players, to the characters, now you as the dungeon master have a means to try and feel out and judge when certain things would apply, right? Clearly there's going to be rules in here and guidelines for the important things that pop up. Like a dragon breath has a definite save against breath, right? But what about if your character is about to be washed over with molten oil, with tar that's boiling? right? Where in the rules does it tell you how to handle that? Well, you could, figure out that maybe that's a saving throw, right? Maybe that is similar to dragon breath, right? You could educate it that way, right? No, Aaron is boiled alive in molten tar. Or maybe Aaron is trying to very quietly sneak into the kitchen and steal all the muffins that the Duchess was supposed to have for breakfast. I don't know, guys. I'm straining here, right? We could decide that the Duchess is a very light sleeper, right? We'll make it a challenging of 15, and we roll and we add 1. And look at that, Aaron, 14 plus 1. The difficulty was 15. That means Aaron got into the kitchen really quietly and started just eating all the muffins. And the Duchess is going to wake up really grumpy. This is hilarious. I love you, Aaron, bro. Let's give him a little star next to his name. Hell yeah. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, don't be intimidated by making spot calls. Just make sure you're consistent with it. As long as you're consistent with how you handle certain things, the game's going to run smoothly. And this way I explained it applies not just to basic fantasy, but to most old school role-playing games. You could, and they'll each have their own way of handling things, but you need to learn on basically your own terms when it's appropriate to roll, to challenge the players and the characters, to see if they survive threats or accomplish tasks. Like, that's something that you're going to have to feel out as a DM. But hopefully having these guidelines will give you something to work with, right? We're going to roll strength anytime that there is tests of might, right? Aaron's going to roll and test his strength if he is trying to hold a rope steady that has a lot of weight. He's going to roll dexterity if he's trying to be graceful and sneaky. He's going to roll constitution if he is drinking a lot or enduring the elements, He's going to roll intelligence if he's trying to solve something with logic. He's going to roll wisdom if he is trying to sense something or understand something, something that lies just outside the realm of common knowledge, right? Like, intelligence is your book learning, but wisdom is things that you experience and learn throughout your senses or your insight into things. There's a lot of debate as to when intelligence wisdom should be used. You as a dungeon master are going to have to make spot calls for that. The way I run it is that if a character would know something because they've read it, or they've learned it, or they've trained in it, that's intelligence. And if a character would understand something intuitively, or be aware of something, or sense it somehow, that's wisdom. The old adage of intelligence is knowing a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing not to add tomato to your fruit salad, right? Those are the two different things. And charisma is any time that your character needs to be sociable in some way and make an impression on someone or persuade them. You're going to test that. Whereas the saves, they're kind of more like, I don't like them. I'll just be honest. I think that the names of them are very specific, and using them outside of those contexts is kind of weird. But, this is what we use with the old school role playing. And, you're going to use them in specific circumstances as said in the book. But you are also going to need to learn to use them as well. Like, for example, if the characters are trying to avoid a dart trap, right? You might think, okay, well, that sounds like a wand or something, or magic, some kind of projectile being slung at you. You'd roll wand or something. Or maybe the characters are trying to pull themselves out of quicksand. Well, you might look at that and say, well, maybe that sounds like immobilizing, like petrifying, right? You could use that, and that is completely valid. You're going to have to learn as a DM how to interpret these numbers and when to test for them. But in general, if the character's trying to accomplish a task, test one of their abilities. And the character you want to see if they manage to avoid some calamity, test their saves. You know, whether you use my sliding scale of difficulty or not, you know, once you understand that that's what these two sets of numbers can be used for, you can build off of that now, right? We're not playing 5th edition, so we don't have strict guidelines on how every single thing works. We are playing old school games where the joy is trying to come up with a way to educate the wild and crazy things your players are going to do, right? Aaron might say, I want to shoot a crossbow while diving for cover, right? That's not technically a thing, right? But why the hell not? Why isn't it a thing? Maybe you can make a save to see if he actually trips up when he shoots his crossbow for cover. You know, or maybe Aaron wants to throw a cream pie at the Duchess's face the next day after he ate all her muffins, right? Well, that sounds like an attack roll, right? Or let's say Aaron is trying to stealthily add poison to one of the bar, the tavern patrons, right? Well, that sounds like a dexterity to be stealthy. But maybe Aaron doesn't want to add too much poison, right? What if he adds too much? You might test wisdom, right? Like maybe he just wants to add a little sleeping thing. You can get as detailed and nuanced as you want. You can make as many rolls as you want. But in general, just try to be consistent in how you test the characters. And if you can do that, you're going to find a lot of enjoyment. And the players are going to have a lot of fun overcoming the challenges that you present. You know, it doesn't always have to be combat. It doesn't always have to be a fight in order for there to be a challenge to overcome. And sometimes you may not even want to roll at all, right? If Aaron wants to get on a horse, well, do you really need to test if he falls off or not? Do you? A test should be made if there's a chance that failure will make the situation interesting, not stupid or complicated or boring or trivial. You want to test them, the characters, in circumstances where failure creates something interesting. Please don't make Aaron roll to wash the dishes. Please, for the love of God, don't make Aaron roll charisma to see if he greets his neighbor correctly. Like, don't do that. You're reducing it to chores at that point. But maybe roll dexterity if Aaron has a limited amount of time to wash the dishes, and failure means that his captors will do something mean to him. Or absolutely roll charisma if Aaron is greeting his neighbor in a foreign country where he doesn't know the customs. You know, the way that you handle tasks and challenges in your game will give flavor to your character, to the game. You're teaching your players the kind of world they live in when you test them and challenge them. So if your characters understand that there's going to be a lot of rolling when it comes to social encounters, they're going to understand that this is something that's important. Whereas if you hand wave a lot of social encounters, but you then roll a lot on like merchant stuff and like bartering and trading, that's going to teach the players that this is what's important in the campaign. But don't bog down the game with unnecessary rolls. You want to test and roll and ask the players to roll when there are circumstances that would invite interesting outcomes. When things and situations are putting pressure on the players, on the characters, and you want to see what happens because you don't know, right? We can all assume Aaron can read, a child's book, right? He's kind of dumb. You don't need to make him roll for that. But if Aaron is trying to read a child's book written in an ancient language, and he has the language, you might want to roll for that. So I hope this has been helpful. There are a lot of ways to handle roles in old school games. This is just how I happen to do it. Maybe it's useful to you, maybe it's not. But I hope that regardless of that, that you walk away with something that you can use in the future. So, until next time, keep swinging them swords. Boy.